Wiper Democratic Movement Party. It's Eric and Ndu. City has stepped out for a meeting, but he was here earlier, and he also met with Kalonzo on his way out, and they shook hands and they agreed that they're together.
In good practice.
In good practice, that they're in this journey together. Have you downloaded Maramoja Taxi app? You should, because Maramoja Taxi app, as we've been saying, is a Kenyan taxi hailing app, and it works very well, pays very well to the drivers, and it's the cheapest in the market for you as a user, as the fare. And also, if you use SPICE30 as your code, you get a 30% discount on your next ride. And if you load money into the Maramoja wallet, you get 50% extra immediately into that wallet. Our conversation continues. Mheshimiwa, we had mentioned, the question of Azimio, One Kenya coalition political party, and whether this coalition will last until 27 and go into the election of 2027. What do you think? You see it lasting?
And
I'm asking this question based on the history of the coalitions that you've participated in before. Quad Coalition, 2013.
There was NAC, by the way.
Yes, there was
NAC.
NAC coalition broke by the next election.
Into power.
And then 2013, there was the Quad Coalition. By 2017,
had a lot of tear gas.
There was another coalition. 2022, another coalition. Do you see
NASA,
this one?
by the way.
Yeah, it was NASA in 2017. Do you see this one going into the next election?
Well, I wouldn't be worried about that, Eric. And I'll tell you why.
Yeah.
The end game, and it's not being Machiavellian, but we have to remain responsive to the political situation in the country. For now, I can tell you with confidence that it's the intention of all of us, members of Azimio la Umoja One Kenya coalition party, to remain united. We think it is in the best interest of our country. It is in the best interest of evolution of democratic practice in our country. And we don't want to disappoint Kenyans, because I keep hearing them saying, please hold together. Please hold together. So that you will at any given time have two main political formations. However, you can never rule out the possibility of some people feeling disgruntled or something. My urge is, if that situation arises, we should discuss. Remember, I started by saying the next political contest in the form of a general election, right, will have to be defined in 2024. So this is a time to define these things, debunk our own coalition, find out where did the rain, for example, start beating us, and so that we can remain united. But I can tell you that as of now, I have no indications whatsoever from any of our coalition partners that they would want to act in a manner that will diminish the effectiveness of the coalition, because we must hold this government to account.
The conversation about 2024 being the determinant for 2027 has been said by you this morning more than once.
Yes.
But in that coalition of yours, you're the only one so far that I've had saying it. Maybe the others have said it, but we haven't heard it. We have seen some movement, internal movements within the Azimio One Kenya coalition of trying to have conversations that maybe would shape the direction of Azimio or would shape the direction out of Azimio. The Kamwene conversation, for example, that's spearheaded by some members of Jubilee and NAC Kenya. And you have even made a comment about that.
Yeah, I did. And I can tell you that I'm well informed that that is a caucus. So, as far as I know, my sister Mother and my friend Jeremiah Kioni have been the proponents. And they mean well. They mean well in terms of wanting to pass certain political messages, particularly in the Mount Kenya region. But all within, because they've assured us, all within Azimio la Umoja One Kenya. I've not heard any of them say they may want to leave the coalition.
Okay. Let's look at the coalition and the reasons why it came together in the first place. And it seemed as though, here we're looking at Circumstances, in most cases, will influence what you will do. And here, a lot of people come together who maybe were together before, maybe were not. But circumstances brought this coalition together. And I'm still coming back to the point where Kalonzo Musyoka has said he wants to be president 2027, again, for the purposes of this room for now. 2027, you want to be president in that year. From a coalition whose interests are as diverse as they come, and who may have other individuals who want to be in that position. It will be a position that you have been in before. This coalition having come together on those diverse points, should they decide, or should conversations happen when a different flag bearer from Kalonzo Musyoka is chosen? Play that against your conviction to be president of this country. Will you remain? And it is a reality, or it is a possibility of a reality that you must take into consideration, bearing on the fact, the manner in which things have happened historically.
Allow me, not to engage in speculation about what will happen to the coalition or what will not happen to the coalition. For now, take it, perhaps, as they say, to the bank, right? That you're dealing with a very serious political, with a very serious presidential hopeful.
Yes.
Very serious.
Okay.
Take it that. Because it's the best interest of the country, not just because of, I actually said, I'm the face of a struggle. The face of a struggle. The Kenyans who are suffering. High taxation, like has never happened before. I've heard William Ruto argue that he wants to practice Kibaki type of economics. He forgets that I was Kibaki's deputy, if you like, vice for 5 years. And Kenyans will know President Kibaki had some health challenges. Who do you think, William Ruto, who do you think was driving Kibakinomics, if you like?
Raila,
All right?
Raila has told us it was him.
No. Raila and Kalonzo are together.
Okay.
But I was the principal assistant to President Kibaki when the economy of this country grew substantially at about 7% of GDP under Kibaki. I keep on telling people that Kibaki was so selfless that even when we were launching this Thika superhighway, and I see he's already having huge problems with traffic, but it's a major piece of infrastructure. Kibaki was so selfless, we would not even allow it to be named after him. He asked me, Vice President, you want me to have this named after me, but this road will lead to some place. Of course, that was the end of the conversation. We worked with Kibaki. We have the experience. And the experience, therefore, informs us that this country is headed the wrong way. You cannot tax Kenyans, right? And I call this a slush fund, by the way. It's a matter that is canvassed, one of the issues that I think William wants to discuss with the Chief Justice, all right? Because their main concern is this housing tax, which is Minister for Finance calls investment levy. I don't know who is fooling who. And the PS Housing appeared before the National Dialogue Committee and called it a tax. So this is a situation which is unacceptable. And if you allow people to be overtaxed and they cannot take their children to school, children are now going back to school. Parents are crying all over. There's confusion in the entire education system. Remember, I was Minister for Education for 3.5 years. Okay, and I know that time when we started free primary education with Mzee Kibaki. Even that, we are seeing a situation of winding back the gains in terms of free and compulsory primary education. So, why would you think that yours truly would be persuaded this time round to give way when he has given so much to the struggle, the face of a struggling nation? A face is saying no to impunity. The face says the only document we have that can hold us, and we painstakingly negotiated Constitution 2010, and all of us, state officers, are to swear to uphold the Constitution, all right, out there to Uhuru Park. By the way, I think they've messed up Uhuru Park. I feel very unhappy about it. because they were thinking maybe people move from Uhuru Park and drive them out of State House. I think Kenyans better understands how to do these things. But whatever is happening, there's a different story. We saw that to uphold the rule of law in accordance with the Constitution. I repeat, fidelity, #fidelity to the Constitution. So, therefore, please do not belabor the point. Kenyans know each other. We know each other as leaders. We know. It's just like they don't want to say it now. As my party organ said, we will push this thing through the normal channels, in due course, due process, delegates conference. This is the time. Thank you.
Kalonzo, you were recently given an opportunity by Parliament to co-chair the National Dialogue. And in that National Dialogue, of course, like you've said, the Azimio side brought some issues to the table. The Kenya Kwanza side brought some issues to the table. Kenyans had brought their issues to the table long before. And one of the issues, the big issues, was the cost of living. And then there were other issues, of course, coupled with the political and the healing process from 2022 that talked about reviewing the election outcome and ensuring that there's electoral justice going forward. The report that came out of that lengthy process did not adequately address the issue of the cost of living, which is what is, like you've said, is currently front and center of Kenyans' minds. Or do you tell Kenyans, why did you fail them?
I tell Kenyans not to lose hope. We were very clear, and we tried to help this government, this regime, if you like, to see that Kenyans were suffering. But they didn't want to. So we find the elephant ears. We tried to even get them. There's a young man there called Cheruyot, the leader of the majority in the Senate.
Yep.
I find him proactive. He tried to do whatever he could to convince his colleagues on the other side, checking with KRA and others what it is they could give or not give. And he came and briefed us. But at the end of the day, we said a shilling here, a shilling there from a road levy or something. It doesn't add up. And so we told them that we have agreed to disagree, and Kenyans have the option to take the necessary action. Now, which might include them demonstrating, because one of the things that is now clear in Kenya's mind is it is their constitutional right to picket, to demonstrate as occasion demands, provided, and there's always that very important proviso, they do so unarmed. So please remember, we lost close to 80 young Kenyans because of demonstrations. They could not even allow us to even give them decent send-off, including a welcome mass. Even the churches were given instructions not to allow us to go out and then pray for the souls of these young people. The pain that country went through last year was excruciating, and it is still there, bottomed up, all right? So we did our best, and this report now is before Parliament.
Okay. But then, Mheshimiwa, Kenyans...
But on the cost of living, we have disagreed. And we still insist that this cost of living, Eric, we still insist the cost of living is a big issue. Look at this tax. Why are they so obsessed with this housing tax? This is what will drive Kenya Kwanza home. If they care to listen.
Yep.
Yeah. Because every Kenyan with a payslip, the middle class, you see, in order to help the hustler nation, you don't have to slay the goose that lays the golden egg. And that the Kenyan middle class, over years, unlike many African nations, this country has developed a middle class, complete with a diaspora. And I'm sure a lot of them are listening to your shows. We will know that the remittances from Kenyans abroad, sometimes I think it's already overtaken our agricultural exports.
It is top,
all right?
Yes.
It's top, right?
Yep.
The top thing. Why would you want to discourage these Kenyans? It is not the business of government to go and building houses. Make the environment attractive. There are a lot of private developers, by the way, who have been doing this, and they can afford to sell these houses cheaply where there is, the market forces, so that if you're overselling your flats or something, your development, the developments that you real estate developers everywhere, all right? That competition is healthy. But we are in defense of the middle class. These are the people who make it possible for Kenyans to at least eke a living.
May I
If you
remind
now
Mr.
overtax
Joa,
them,
Yeah.
then you kill them. If the elections were held tomorrow, I'll tell you what I would do if I was elected president. I will, with the first executive order, like William Ruto did, to get those judges,
appoint judges.
Appoint judges.
Yours would be to
to do away with that housing tax.
the Azimio manifesto talked about housing.
Yeah, but
Your
it didn't
presidential
say you
candidate-
overtax and kill people.
Your presidential candidate talked about implementing the housing fund, which Uhuru had tried to do, but was stopped by the courts.
I think he listened.
And
not only
Raila
that,
had
I
said,
think they listened.
we are going to reintroduce the housing fund. We will follow process, but we will have a housing fund. So
What
you're
happened,
also
Eric?
going to form a housing fund had you been
Thank
elected
you.
into
Thank
office.
you. After following due process, after listening to Kenyans, I've heard some of these sycophants say that even against a court order, they will go on and have public participation over these issues.
They begin
I
today,
call that
actually.
sycophancy. I call it, it's really degrading the rule of law. Kenyans must have a conversation. How many Kenyans say they would welcome the idea of a housing tax after due process, after the matter was canvassed before Parliament? The majority of them, over 90%, including key stakeholders, captains of industry and others, all right, who are now forced to even lay off Kenyans. Do you know that during our talks we discovered, for example, over 6,000 companies registered and operating in Kenya had actually moved to the regions, right? That means loss of Kenyan jobs. That's what I'm saying. This thing called housing tax will drive William Ruto and Kenya Kwanza home.
Do you know what?
If
the
they
loss-
don't listen.
Sure. Do you know what the perception is in some quarters? And I think it is important sometimes to look at what the perception is. That there's a lot of clamor on this one thing for a time where many Kenyans are united, unfortunately, in the grieving of the loss because of the economy.
Yeah.
And that it is being used as currency to drive popularism here.
No.
This is the perception, and we must accept
Okay,
it.
do. Yeah, continue.
So that because one side is not in government, that thing is being used to push an agenda. And that what is the litmus test to show that leaders, whether they're in government or whether they're in the opposition, really are bothered about this thing that Kenyans are suffering from, because we cannot play with it. It is actually a very serious matter.
It is.
That what people were
what is the
able to
exchange rate?
purchase with 100 shillings in 2024, even in 2023, is very different from what they were able to purchase 3-4 short years ago. But it looks as though it's being used as currency for expediency because a particular side is not in government.
No.
And my question is, how do you reverse that perception? Because would it be a pain point if the roles were reversed? And that's the question that people are asking.
Yes.
And how do you convince people of
I
that?
know that William Ruto and his government have been arguing about the debt problem in this country. We have been in government, and we know, for example, Kenyans will remember we used to talk of the Paris Club, where countries would do debt rescheduling. We've offered solutions during the National Dialogue Committee. It is not that we are just wanting to take advantage. Far from it. We don't want to sound cheap, but we're dealing with the real suffering of the Kenyan people. And we brought these matters to the table. We even brought our own economic teams. You remember Governor Deritu, one of our foremost young economists, former governor of Laikipia, leading our teams on what is the alternative that we would want to prefer before the Kenyans. So it is not that we want to take advantage of the suffering of the Kenyan people. We must thank God because now the rains are looking good. Never mind they didn't even get the weather forecasting right. I think they should have talked to you whether we were going to El Nino rains or not. All right, the devastation that then ensued, and the squandering of public resources in the name of trying to deal with that issue of El Nino phenomenon. Now we thank God for the rains and the good crop, right? But I can tell you, this issue of the cost of living and the way the Kenya Kwanza regime is tackling it, will definitely not, it's not satisfactory. We've tried to tell them. In any event, if they feel dissatisfied with that, William Ruto himself has said he prefers a strong opposition. We are not going to sit there and see Kenyans suffering. We will tell it as it is, as the alternative to Kenya Kwanza.
One of the main issues that you've been pushing as Azimio is the repealing of the Finance Act and saying it introduced measures that are the ones that are hurting Kenyans in terms of just taking everything from their pocket from all angles. But then the Finance Act was passed by Parliament.
After, as it was passed, that's what I referred to, Eric. What was the level and what was the conclusion with regard to the public participation? Over 90% of all those people who participated said no to that Finance Act, including the churches, by the way.
Yes.
And I applaud the Roman Catholic bishops. They have been very consistent because these are men and women, through the priests and everybody who is listening, who are listening to what the Kenyans are saying. They are suffering. It is, again, not populism, it isn't. And why would a Catholic bishop want to sound popular? This is the reality on the ground.
So Kenyans told Parliament,
that
we don't like
is wrong.
the proposed measures.
Of course.
And yet Parliament
And then they
passed
decided
it.
to push it. William Ruto himself has said, these are painful measures.
Parliament,
And then plays speculation that hopefully in the years ahead, things will get better. Well, what have other countries done? Kibaki and us brought in the stimulus package to be able to rescue the suffering businesses. In his case, it is adding punitive taxes.
it's stimulus
This is
package
the
to the government.
Yeah.
My question is, Parliament being the independent institution that it should be, passed this. Your party has members in Parliament. In fact, your party occupies the position of deputy minority leader in Parliament, in those houses, right?
And do you know the reality?
Why?
If
why
democracy,
do we see,
Eric, taking you on that point alone,
yeah.
if it had not been the shenanigans, the gerrymandering, the corruptly buying leadership, messing up, and therefore one of the agenda items under NADCO was fidelity to multi-party democracy, we would be the majority party in Parliament. And this is clear. Therefore, you refer to member for Kadhiani, who is a Wiper member of candidate for Kadhiani constituency, who is a deputy to Wandai. Both of them should actually be the majority and I mean the majority leader and the deputy majority leader.
So Kenyans
this
elected a majority Azimio members.
Of course. And then
to
they were
Parliament.
bought off, some of them, with all
What
kinds
does
of
this
things. It
buying
must
off
be in
mean?
government. Buying off means enticing. I think some of them, I understand, are very unhappy. You remember UDM, with 2 governors, for example, and I think 7 members of Parliament. Those were the first ones to go. All right? And it was very clear in terms of the coalition documentation that they were in Azimio, La Umoja, One Kenya.
Okay.
Why would the person or group of persons that have taken leadership go and say, these are our people anyway? Like I had to tell and plead with William Ruto and tell him, Mr. President, listen, all right? You are UDA leader. Leave Jubilee alone. But did we not see him the other day, even after conclusion of the NADCO sittings, him hosting 120 Jubilee MCS
For Chai.
for Chai? What does that mean? What
You
do
tell
call
me,
that?
what does that, fidelity to the Constitution? I want
And
to,
fidelity constitution
I want
means
to go
we,
back to
Kenya shall
something.
be a multi-party democracy.
Mheshimiwa,
Yeah, look at that constitution.
you're a senior counsel. You have participated in legislation in this country since 1983, right?
Yeah.
When you joined Parliament. And then
No, I
since
joined
then,
in 85.
in 85,
I
yes.
first ran in 83
when
and lost.
when you joined Parliament in 85. All those years you've participated, even in the writing of this current constitution,
Indeed.
you are involved. I want to say something that is obviously obvious to you, but is clearly appearing like it's not obvious. We, the people of Kenya,
We,
in
the people.
2010, voted by a majority to adopt a new constitution.
Indeed, that's
We
correct.
promulgated a new constitution. We gave ourselves a new constitution. In that constitution, we have defined several things that are ideals. First, we define our boundaries and say this is a territory called Kenya. And then we also define our ideals. This is the Bill of Rights. Each one of us has a right to this and the other, and some of these rights are inalienable. We then said we are going to exercise our sovereign authority directly or through elected leaders and institutions. And we created those institutions. We created a government and made it a three-stooled government, three-legged stool. We said there's going to be an executive. We shall elect the head of that executive. We said there's going to be a judiciary. We are not going to elect it, but we shall have proper mechanisms of making sure that only the best sit in that judiciary. We shall elect our direct representatives into the Houses of Parliament. And we said we shall give them powers, our representatives. Parliament was given powers by the people to represent them. It was given powers by the people to write laws that would ensure that we achieve our ideals as a people. It was given powers by the people to create a budget and to manage that budget by oversighting the executive and making sure that everything that the executive does is in accordance with the law. And Parliament has a stick that it can use to bring the executive back in line. And if there's any dispute, it can then go to the judiciary.
Indeed.
We shall be the independent arbiter. We have given Parliament so much powers. We have even given Parliament powers to receive reports from independent offices, the Office of the Auditor General, the Office of the Controller of Budget. If there is any misuse of our public funds, the Controller of Budget and the Auditor General shall flag it to Parliament. Parliament shall use that report to also whip the executive back in line. So in this matrix...
You make a very good constitutional lawyer, by the way.
I'm a good student of what you've been saying. In this entire matrix, Parliament is a very, very powerful institution. We, the people, have given Parliament so much power. Please explain to me, Mheshimiwa, what witchcraft is this? That we can then see Parliament
Yes.
coming back to the people and saying it has been emasculated by the executive. How?
Wonderful. Unfortunately, that is what has happened. And
How?
I gave you an example of, for example, emasculating the political outcomes immediately after the elections. That Kenya would actually have ended up like the situation in the US today, where the Democrats are the majority in Congress, all right? And I think the Republicans are the majority in the Senate. You can correct me on that. And that would be very good in terms of checks and balances. It would be a very strong parliament if the executive is led by Kenya Kwanza and the legislature is in the hands of Azimio. But they did not want to allow that. So the first emasculation happened at that point. First of all, getting the numbers, creating fear, intimidation, and then you end up, and this seems to continue. And by the way, the outcomes of the National Dialogue Committee was that this should stop. This is why it is important for Parliament to adopt that report. Because under its terms, we will cause amendment to Article 103 of the Constitution, where, for example, if an ODM member, and you remember some of them were de-whipped, and some of them were even removed as members of Parliament, all right? But to give effect to that decision, we need to amend the Constitution at Article 103 so that if a member voluntarily or goes through a disciplinary process of his own political party and they are removed, then they have to go back to the electorate and seek a fresh mandate. This is how to make sure the emasculation of Parliament stops. As it is, it continues. You know, oh goodies. By the way, I think the reality, Eric, if you check the reality, is that this is a continuing process because people are afraid that if Parliament acts properly, like in the matter of the this taxation proposals, then they will say stop it. But you want to a situation where the executive bulldozes through Parliament. And this is what we are saying must stop. And the same, of course, the three-legged too. The law, for example, the Law Society of Kenya, is to ensure that they give proper advice to, along with that of the Attorney General, to the executive, which they can choose to follow, as in this case, of course, they have chosen to go their own way.
But you know, Mheshimiwa, I find this hard to swallow and to fathom.
But we, the people, and by the way, on that one, Eric, remember...
If we created this institution and made it powerful, is it that those who are going into the office of Member of Parliament, of Senator, do not understand the power that they wield? Is it that the institution of Parliament does not understand? Because why Parliament gives the executive the budget, but then Parliament is pleading with the executive for the implementation of that budget. Parliament is going on strike because money has not been given back to Parliament.
We try to deal with that issue, by the way. But listen to me. We, the people, all right? And the people delegate the power to do all those things to their elected representatives. But where the elected representatives in Parliament, say even in the county assemblies, act in contravention of the people's expectations, then the people have the right to withdraw that delegated authority. This is when people say, we go to the streets, we demand our rights, our own people have been bought off, and please allow that situation where members of Parliament actually do get bought. They actually do get bought. And so we must make sure that doesn't continue. That's why I'm saying fidelity to the rule of law, fidelity to the Constitution. That is what will save us. And I started by saying the Constitution itself is a living document, okay? And it, on occasion, we may have to cause one or two amendments. The American Constitution, I think, went through several amendments. So, but as of now, let us stick to what we have. A very progressive Constitution, very strong, under the Bill of Rights, the chapter on the Bill of Rights, and the rights, basic rights of the Kenyan people, the right to shelter, the right to decent life, the right to education. All those basic rights are written there. And when they see a violation of those rights, they have the right to go to the streets. So when that happens, police should not come with live bullets and shoot them dead.
So then maybe the question is then, the Constitution is not what has the issue. The Constitution is not what has the problem. That it's prescribed properly. It's the leaders then who have been transferred, to whom this power has been transferred delegated to, who have an issue.
Yes.
It's the members of Parliament. It's those who hold the least, but in my opinion, some of the fundamentally most important centers of power. It's those who have what I'll simply call bad manners and are not actually doing what ought to be done. And so then we have a collapsed system. So the Constitution doesn't have an issue. And this is my question. With whomever leader will be there in the future, because many would argue that currently we're in a bit of a problem.
A bit of a problem is an understatement.
It is. I'm choosing my words carefully for the purposes of sanity. Now, if we say that somebody... Who is that person going to be? Who will uphold the sanctity of the law? Who will uphold the sanctity of the rights of the people? Because as far as I'm concerned, if the picture of the nation is the most vulnerable people, that's the true picture. And if that's the picture that's being painted and remains that's what people are looking at, then we have a problem. And if we can easily say, as though it's nothing, that leaders to whom this power has been delegated can be easily bought off, we have to ask ourselves the question, what on earth is going on? And we're still being asked, 5 years after 5 years, to put hope back into those same people.
Uchawi.
How?
Uchawi.
Yeah.
Voodoo.
Voodoo. It's some serious
Indeed.
juju.
But we must not lose hope. We must not lose hope. But allow me to say, we are not again as a country operating as an island, all right? We are within a community of nations, and this country's space, our own space, is even getting violated. Because of misrule at home, you're now seeing that the existence, the very foundation of the East African community itself, and we have the East African Treaty establishing the community. The membership has grown to include Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, Burundi, South Sudan, who are currently the chair, and DRC, and even recently Somalia.
Yep.
Now, look at that market for Kenyan goods. If only we can get our manufacturing sector going, working 24/7 again, without pilferage, without stealing, all right? And I don't want to address corruption. Corruption has been spoken of so much that Kenyans have become immune to that thing. They wonder, will anybody ever help us out of this? But these, the standards of performance, the normal interstate relations, even this is threatened. The DRC withdrew the ambassador to Kenya. Sudan, a member of IGAD, has withdrawn its ambassador to Kenya. Of course, Somalia and Ethiopia are almost at each other's loggerheads, none of what doing as a country. But look at, and I'm happy that Kenya Airways have resolved the issue with Tanzania, because it's beginning to look another front. Uganda has taken Kenya to the East African Court of Justice because of the infamous G2G matter of how we fuel our vehicles and how we should treat a landlocked country like Uganda, like Rwanda, like Burundi. Okay? So you're looking at a situation where the country is becoming like a lone ranger. So our own diplomacy is at stake, and nobody takes Kenya seriously. That's another problem. Okay? And we have, as Kenyans, I think if we do need to have that conversation and see how we can restore. For example, nobody should be allowed to demean the importance of the community. As I started by saying, even others borrowed from us in the 70s. But right now, we're in a flux again. The goofing we see. Remember at the beginning of this thing, first of all, people said that Kenya was cutting off diplomatic relations with Sahrawi Republic and others, only to realize, wow, another goof. So, but some of us are there to assist, because in the interest of the country, then we stop being opposition and we are ready to help where we can.
Accountability is a big thing, Mheshimiwa. In those that have been entrusted with positions of leadership, they ought to be accountable at every stage, whether they're in office or even after they're in office. Now we look at the things that have happened in this country over many years, and we keep skipping the beat on accountability.
Yeah.
You are involved in the diplomacy to push for, let's have an internal justice mechanism for the post-election violence of 2007.
Indeed.
It did not happen.
It didn't happen.
Even locally, those that participated in killing, in destroying property, in maiming their neighbors, were never held to account.
Indeed.
And
there
that
are people
conversation
today,
just went
by
and
the
died.
way, I can tell you the people in Kisii, because the community of Kisii were badly affected at the border, Chebilat area, border between Kericho and Kisii. And Kisiis got hold of their fellow Kisiis and gave them houses and residence and comfort. And to date, that problem has never been addressed. The issue of internally displaced and justice for them. And people were uprooted from their farms in the Rift Valley and other places. That issue has just been glossed over.
Yep.
So when Kenyans look at this, they wonder, what is our justice system? So it is important to look again as those historical injustices. People in these days, you hear some of them saying state capture. I don't know from which angle, state capture. But there are basic issues that should have been addressed. And in order to bring correct healing and real healing to this country, a country of great potential, very hard-working people.
And yet
we want to be able to release their potential.
Kenyans look at leaders such as yourself, the top national leaders of this country. You're one among the few, maybe about 7 of you, right, who are the top leadership of the country. And we don't hear much about the conversation on the justice. The Agenda 4 commissions, after the 2008 dialogue was reached, there was a Truth, Justice and Reconciliation Commission, produced a report. Kriegler produced a report on how we should do our elections.
Indeed.
Even since then, there have been incidences of violence, of violation of people's rights, and there have been calls for accountability and justice. But we don't hear consistent and strong voices from the likes of Kalonzo Musyoka on this. From the likes of Kalonzo Musyoka saying, as Wiper, this will be our continuous call for the Truth, Justice and Reconciliation Commission report to be discussed in Parliament. Because we are a parliamentary political party, this shall be the one thing that we keep asking every new cycle. We don't hear this from you.
I take your challenge, Eric, and we will need to do that. Because if we just gloss over issues and hope that time heals, then we might find that in generations to come, we might be back at the same situation. And the whole thing is born of stolen elections. If we can get rid of this cancer of every so often people doing all kinds of things, Camagos and the rest of them from Venezuela and others, messing up our own sovereignty. Where the Chief Justice, for example, and our team, if you remember, sitting as a Supreme Court, made an order that this Venezuelan company should open the servers. And you know what they did? They even could not obey that order, citing intellectual property rights and what have you. So you see that our own sense of independence gets aggressed upon. So those are issues, and the pertinent issues I share with you, Eric, that we need to open discussion. So we bring closure. The problem is all those reports are there, but they've never been brought up to public discussion. I remember during the National Dialogue Committee sittings, we heard from Attorney General Emeritus Amos Wako, who has been a key player in the history of this country, saying we perhaps need a national conversation. A national conversation. When the healing takes place or when the political situation allows, it may be important. As Kenyans, remember one time even Mzee Moi, we had a conference at the KICC, which was dubbed the Kenya we want. The Kenya we want. So we must stop this aggression, one arm of government against the other one, in violation of the Constitution, and we the people are just sitting there watching in dismay, even as they come up and say they want to sell state corporations. The KICC, for example. I think that that conversation was very interesting. I followed it. It looks like somebody gave the wrong figures to William, and that was not what KICC as a parastatal was able to make. It's an iconic building. Even if you look at, I think, Kenya currency notes, you will see that a KICC is not to be played with. You know, there are things that are in the category of national heritage, which should not be played with. But on this issue, Eric, of governance, I've seen today, in today's one of the publications, I think not the People Daily, the one dealing with economic issues.
Business Daily.
Yeah,
The
Business
Business
Daily.
Yeah.
I really admire Business Daily. But today they come up with something the cabinet approved on what they're calling single something.
It's a treasury single account.
A treasury single account.
Yeah.
That's another very interesting situation. We should be talking of separating in order to act in the best interest of what the Constitution provides and strengthen devolution. Have a separation. I think I saw him arguing, Tata arguing about this point. A separation between the Ministry of Finance and the National Treasury.
Yeah.
Because whoever is in position who wields power can always manipulate a situation. Hence, you hear them rightly or wrongly arguing about empty coffers.
Yeah.
We should be able to make it impossible for anybody leaving office not to interfere with the National Treasury. Of course, those are allegations and they remain as allegations.
Okay.
1 year after they took office,
For that to
why
happen,
would they say they do not have the necessary funds?
For that to happen, it's just a piece of legislation.
Yeah.
through Parliament.
I'm hoping
they
to see
willing?
that this is going to be a
We will push
Wiper-sponsored
this. We will push
piece
this
of
through
legislation.
Senate. I've given instructions to Senator Ambua. He actually briefed me that they're going to have a bill in the Senate to deal with this matter of separation
Okay.
in order to act in the best interest of devolution. Have the
Mheshimiwa,
National Treasury as a custodian
Yeah.
of our heritage.
we
And
are-
not governments who come in today and they leave tomorrow.
I hear you. We are where we are right now as a country, where, like you've said, rightly said, going around the country and people are feeling the pain of the economic situation, brought about in part by the current debt burden. Even the president said the other day, one of the things that's keeping him awake is this debt issue. Out of more than 70% of revenues are going into repaying debt. And looking back and wondering, does this debt actually lead to, was it properly applied or was it not? What's Wiper's position on our current debt situation?
First of all, we must remind President William Ruto that he was part and parcel of Jubilee government. He was not even vice president, by the way. He was deputy president for 10 years. You heard me say I was Kibaki's vice president for only 5 years, and we grew this economy, along with, of course, the Grand Coalition government partners, including Raila Odinga. Him and William and his boss that time, Uhuru Kenyatta, were in charge of the reins of leadership for 10 good years when they went for those commercial loans. And remember, Kenyans will have forgotten the story of a Eurobond. We may one of these days ask ourselves, who are the true beneficiaries of that saga? And where were they? So they're now claiming...
Why do we need to ask that question?
Because as we unveil the truth about state capture and whatever, they might find they're all engrossed in it. We have followed, and I think that my friend Jimmy Wanjigi has been here, and I know him as a serious operative, and he can tell you a lot about the story of the standard railway gauge. All those things. The culmination of which was heavy external debt. But the way to deal with the debt issue is to negotiate. To negotiate. You don't lord it over, I repeat, lord it over poor citizens to carry the burden of corruption, if you like. That's a problem.
So
But William Ruto was deputy president for 10 years.
What is Wiper's position?
And therefore, he can never lay any claim to relating economically with President Kibaki.
He can't pass it on and say that he's not...
No, he's really, passing on, running away from responsibility.
Yeah.
First of all, he must own up. Say he was deputy president for 10 years. Yeah.
What is Wiper's position on our national debt?
Our position is we will need to renegotiate, particularly where the knock-on effect is the high cost of living. So, Wiper getting a space, and Wiper is operating within the framework of Azimio.
Okay.
Our position has been elaborated very, very clearly.
What does
By
renegotiate
economic
mean?
team.
We have seen Ethiopia
Yes.
opening conversation on renegotiating its debt, which has led to it having to default so that it renegotiates. Is that what you're advocating?
Of course, default, on this point I agree with William, everything must be done to make sure the countries do not default. But the way they go about it, that's the deception in economics, deception in management. The external debt should not be used as an excuse to mess around with the Kenyans' welfare.
Okay. Winding down to the end of this, but look, you wrote a book.
I think it's up. It must be due for up. What
Yeah.
is it? Or writing another edition.
Yes,
need a new edition.
new edition, right? Updating a number of things.
Yes.
Against all odds, Stephen Kalonzo Musyoka talk about, traversing the political sphere, growing up, and then entering into politics, working as, negotiator for peace in the region. But one of the things that struck me is talk about your fears. You talk about your fears in the political space and your fears for the country. And I think it's important for any leader worth his or her salt to acknowledge some of those fears. And even as we look through some of the things that you've documented here and the dates and the different things that happened, are some of those fears still resident with you today?
You know, one of the very interesting chapters was because we had occasion to discuss this. I think we had a conversation even here about coalition formations and disbanding of the same. Was when in that book, William Ruto comes to my house with Uhuru Kenyatta
At night.
At night, yeah. I was waiting for them from 7 o'clock. I think they must have passed through some street corner and discuss a strategy on how to deal with me. They came. We ended up, by the way, the convener of that meeting was Jimmy Wanjigi. He was the Mr. Fix.
He was the in-between.
Was an agent provocateur.
Yeah.
He brought them. That's why we say we know each other so well. And you know, out of that, I've heard stories saying that I said that when the two of them
when they
are
go
taken
to jail,
the Hague and go to jail, then I'll take over. Can you imagine?
And you will protect
what
them.
vice president, leave alone the vice president, an normal human being would wish to tell a suffering duo that when you guys go to jail, I'll come and help you. Ridiculous. That's why I'm suing Duale, because he has written a book on that chapter. He was not in it.
Yep.
Yeah, and it's a very